Everyone in Orita compound knew Mama Dara's voice before they knew her face. From the moment the morning sun touched the zinc rooftops of their Lagos neighborhood, her laughter, loud and unfiltered, rolled through the narrow corridors between the buildings like the opening notes of a song nobody had asked to hear. She was the kind of woman who filled every silence she found, as if silence itself offended her. She had lived in the compound for over 2 decades, longer than most of the tenants could remember. She had watched babies become teenagers, watched marriages begin and quietly collapse, watched secrets born in hushed voices slowly die in the open air. And for each of those secrets, Mama Dara had been there, not just as a witness, but as the chief narrator. People did not dislike her, exactly. She brought pepper and salt when a new family moved in. She sat with grieving mothers and rubbed their backs. She organized the cleaning rosters and chased children out of the corridor when the landlord's irritable brother came visiting. She was useful. She was warm. But she was also dangerous in the particular way that a leaking tap is dangerous. Not once, but slowly, steadily, until the whole floor is wet. Her husband, Mr. Benson, was a thin, quiet man who sold electrical spare parts in Alaba Market. He had a way of pressing his lips together whenever Mama Dara began a story with the words, "I'm not supposed to say this, but," which happened often. Their 3 children, Dara, their eldest daughter, her younger brother Joel, and the last-born little Grace, had each inherited different amounts of their parents. Dara had her father's stillness. Joel had his mother's laughter. Grace, at 7, was still finding out which side she belonged to. It was a Thursday afternoon in early March when the seed of destruction was first planted, though no one recognized it as such at the time. Mama Dara had invited 4 neighbors into her parlor: Mama Remy from the flat opposite, Auntie Lola whose shop sold provisions at the compound gate, Blessing who worked night shifts at a hotel on the island and slept mornings, and Mrs. Okafor, the landlord's wife, who wore her authority loosely but never fully removed it. They were eating fried plantain and groundnut, and the room was full of the lazy, comfortable heat of women who had known each other long enough to stop performing. The conversation had moved, as it always did, from market prices to school fees to a distant cousin's troubled marriage, when Mama Dara leaned forward, eyes bright with a particular excitement of someone holding a match near dry paper, and said the words that would, in time, undo everything she had built.
You people, I have to tell you what Dara confided in me last week. She doesn't know I'm saying this, but...
She paused, savoring the stillness she had created. For faces tilted toward her like flowers toward light. And Mama Dara, as she had always done, chose the pleasure of the moment over the protection of her child. Dara was 24 years old and had spent the last 3 years carrying a secret that weighed on her like a bag of wet sand. She had told her mother in a moment of weakness, a quiet Sunday evening when the compound was unusually still and Mama Dara had looked, for once, like someone capable of keeping something to herself. Dara had trusted that version of her mother. That had been her first mistake. The secret was this. Dara had become pregnant 18 months ago, before her boyfriend Michael, a decent enough young man from Ikorodu who fixed computers, had fully sorted his finances. They had handled it privately, quietly, with the kind of practical sorrow that young people carry when life moves faster than their plans. Michael knew. Dara knew. And now, without Dara's permission, Mama Dara knew, and had decided that 4 of her closest neighbors should know too. In Mama Dara's telling of it, the story was not cruel. She spoke of Dara with something that looked like affection, her voice soft with the lilt of a woman sharing what she believed was merely a story. "She is young, these things happen," she said, waving a hand as though waving away smoke. "I'm only telling you so you can understand why she has been so quiet lately." She did not notice, or did not want to notice, the way Mrs. Okafor's eyes sharpened behind her smile. Mrs. Okafor was not a wicked woman, but she was a well-connected one. She had a sister-in-law who attended the same Pentecostal church as Michael's mother. She had a tongue that moved almost as freely as Mama Dara's, except with less warmth and more precision. Within 4 days of that Thursday gathering, Michael's mother had heard a version of the story, distorted now, sharpened by each retelling, so that what had once been a private grief had become, in the mouths of strangers, something that sounded like shame. Michael came to see Dara on a Wednesday evening. He did not shout. He was not the shouting type. He simply sat across from her in the corridor outside her family's flat, his cap in his hands, and told her that his mother had called him that morning, weeping, asking if what she had heard was true. His voice was steady in the way that voices become steady when someone is working very hard not to break apart. "Who did you tell?" he asked. Dara knew the answer before she had finished drawing breath to speak it. Inside the flat, Benson was reading a newspaper in his chair, as he always did. He heard the sound of Dora's voice, low, desperate, cracking at the edges, and he set the paper down slowly. He had suspected for some time that something was coming. He had heard Mama Dara that Thursday, heard the particular pitch her voice took on when she was about to say something she shouldn't. He had pressed his lips together and said nothing because he never said anything, and now he sat in the dimming light of the parlor and understood that his silence had been its own kind of failure. Mama Dara was in the kitchen frying tomatoes when Dara appeared in the doorway. Her daughter's eyes were dry, past tears now, into something colder and more permanent. "You told them," Dara said. Not a question. Mama Dara turned from the stove and opened her mouth, and for the first time in as long as anyone could remember, the words did not come quickly. Michael ended the relationship 9 days later. He did not do it angrily. He sent a message. Short, careful, the kind of message a person composes and rewrites several times before sending, saying that he needed time and distance, and that his family's pain made continuing feel impossible for now. Dara read it once, placed her phone face down on the bed, and did not pick it up again until the following morning. She did not speak to Mama Dara for 2 weeks after that night in the kitchen. The flat, which had always been loud with the sounds of a family that took up space boldly, went strange and quiet. Benson moved between rooms like a man navigating a minefield, careful not to disturb anything. Little Grace sensed the change the way children always do, not by understanding it, but by going still and watchful, her usual questions suddenly held inside her like breath. Joel was the one who finally said it out loud. He was 21, the kind of young man who had inherited his mother's directness but tempered it with a sharpness that cut cleaner. He came home one evening, having heard the story from a friend whose cousin attended Michael's church, and he stood in the parlor with his bag still on his shoulder and said, flatly, to no one and everyone, "The whole area knows our business because of this house." Mama Dara, seated on the sofa with a wrapper tied around her chest, began to defend herself, the familiar flood of words rising. She hadn't meant any harm. She had only shared it with people she trusted. Dara was being dramatic. People forget these things quickly. She spoke fast, the way she always spoke when she was frightened, filling space so that nothing could fill it against her. But this time, Joel did not let the flood carry the room. "Stop," he said quietly. And Mama Dara, startled by the cold authority in her son's voice, stopped. Benson, who had remained in his chair through most of the family's unraveling, set down his cup of tea and spoke for the first time in days. His voice was tired, not angry, not loud, just exhausted in the deep way that comes not from lack of sleep but from long years of watching and saying nothing. "Mama Dara," he said, "you have talked this family into a corner. Dara is hurting. The boy has gone. And for what? So Mama Remy could have something to chew on over groundnut." It was not the harshest thing ever said in that flat, but it was the truest. And truth, when it finally arrives after years of delay, lands differently from anything else. Mama Dara looked at her husband, then at Joel, then toward the closed door of Dara's room. The noise inside her, that constant, restless, word-making noise, went quiet for the first time in as long as she could remember. And in that silence, she felt the full shape of what she had done. She sat with it for a long time after everyone had left the room. The smell of frying tomatoes still clung to the kitchen. Outside, the compound was alive with its usual evening sounds: generators, children, distant music from someone's radio. The world was unchanged. But inside Arita Compound's most talkative flat, something had shifted beyond the reach of any apology. By April, Dara had moved out. She found a room in a shared flat in Yoba, close to the office where she worked, and she left on a Saturday morning with 2 bags and a stillness about her that was more frightening than tears would have been. She hugged her father at the door. She kissed little Grace on the forehead. She walked past her mother with a brief nod, the kind you give to a neighbor you once knew, and she was gone. The compound noticed, as compounds always do. Questions were asked, answers were given in fragments and whispers, and the irony settled over the neighborhood with a heaviness that even Mama Dara's most loyal friends felt. The woman who had made a life of knowing everyone else's business had now become the subject of the very thing she practiced. People talked about her the way she had always talked about others, with a mix of sympathy and judgment and the quiet, shameful pleasure of watching a powerful person fall. Mama Remy, who had sat in that parlor eating plantain and hearing everything, avoided Mama Dara now. She greeted her at the tap with a smile that did not reach her eyes and found reasons to be busy when Mama Dara appeared. Auntie Lola, more honest in her withdrawal, simply said, when Mama Dara asked her directly, "I don't want to carry anybody's warla." The circle that had once gathered in that parlor every week had quietly, without announcement, dissolved. Joel began spending more time outside the flat. He was not a difficult son. He came home, he ate, he paid for things when he could, but the warmth had gone from the way he sat in a room with his mother. He no longer laughed at her jokes. He no longer lingered. Mama Dara would catch him looking at her sometimes with an expression she couldn't name, something between pity and a warning, and she would look away first because she was no longer sure she deserved to hold anyone's gaze. It was Grace who broke her heart the most completely, and Grace did it without meaning to. One afternoon, the child came home from school and, while unpacking her bag at the kitchen table, said casually, "Mama, my teacher said people who gossip make enemies." She said it the way children say such things, without edge, without malice, simply reporting the world. She did not look at her mother as she said it. She did not need to. Mama Dara stood at the stove and felt the sentence settle into her chest like hot stone. Benson, in those weeks, became both more present and more distant. He came home from work on time and ate dinner at the table, but he had retreated somewhere inside himself that Mama Dara could see but not reach. She tried once to begin a conversation, to say she was sorry, to say she had not meant for any of it to unfold this way. Benson listened. He nodded. He told her he believed her. And then he said, gently, with the terrible patience of a man who has made peace with disappointment, "Mama Dara, meaning well was never the problem. The problem is that you never learned when to stop." Mama Dara did not change overnight. People rarely do. But something in her had shifted, not loudly, not with the drama she had always brought to everything, but slowly and privately, the way damage heals. Imperfectly, with scar tissue where smooth skin used to be. She started noticing when she was about to say something she shouldn't. The urge still came, fast and familiar, like an old reflex. But for the first time in her life, she began to pause before obeying it. She went to Dara in Yoba on a Sunday in May. She did not call ahead because she was afraid that if she called, Dara would tell her not to come. She took a bus, sitting quietly in a way that anyone who knew her would have found remarkable, and she arrived at Dara's door with a small cooler of pepper soup and nothing prepared to say. When Dara opened the door and saw her, she did not slam it. She stood there for a moment, searching her mother's face, and then she stepped aside to let her in. They sat in Dara's small room for 3 hours. Mama Dara cried, not the loud, performative crying she sometimes deployed in difficult conversations, but the quiet, private kind that embarrasses the person weeping because it shows them as they truly are. She told Dara that she understood, now, that there were things that could not be fixed with an apology. She told her that she was sorry not just for what had happened with Michael, but for every time she had treated someone's pain as her entertainment. Dara listened. She did not forgive immediately. Forgiveness of that depth takes longer than a Sunday afternoon, but she did not close herself off either. She poured her mother tea. And that, for now, was enough. When Mama Dara returned to a Rita compound that evening, Benson was sitting outside the flat on a bench, the way he used to sit in the early years of their marriage when the evening air was bearable. She sat beside him without speaking. They watched the compound together. Children chasing a ball, a generator sputtering on somewhere across the yard, a pair of neighbors exchanging words over a fence. Life, ordinary and continuous, going on. After a while, Benson reached over and rested his hand briefly on top of hers, and then removed it. It was a small thing. But small things, Mama Dara was beginning to understand, were the only things she had left to work with. Joel brought Dara home for the first time in August. It was not a celebration. There was no jollof rice or noise. It was simply a Sunday visit. Dara sitting at the table she had grown up eating from, Grace pressing close to her sister with the desperate affection of a child who had missed someone and not been able to say so. Mama Dara cooked. She did not fill the room with words. She served the food, she sat down, and she listened as her children spoke, their laughter careful at first, then gradually less so, the way rooms warm when enough bodies are in them long enough. There was still damage in that house. There always would be. Some of what Mama Dara's words had destroyed could not be entirely rebuilt. Michael was gone. Trust had been rearranged into a shape that no longer looked the way it used to, and there were things that would remain, from that point on, unsaid between them. But there was also this, a family at a table. A mother who had learned, at great cost, the difference between a voice and a weapon. And the very fragile, very real possibility, not of returning to who they were before, but of becoming something more careful, more tender, and perhaps wiser than they had been. In the end, Mama Dara did not lose her entire family. But she lost enough to understand that the mouth is not just a gate through which words pass. It is the place where we decide every single time whether we are building or burning. And that choice, quiet, invisible, made in an ordinary moment over groundnut and plantain, is one we make not once, but every day we are alive. If Mama Dara's story touched something in you today, if you've ever known someone like her, or perhaps recognized a little of her in yourself, then this story did exactly what it was meant to do. Like, subscribe, share. Let someone who needs to hear this find it. Because the stories we carry change us, and the stories we share can change someone else. Folktales by Inoya.